All right, let's talk about a term you've definitely seen thrown around online, probably in some pretty heated comment sections. It's a term that sits right in that weird, murky space between actual history and wild internet conspiracy theories. The false flag.
So, what's the deal here? Is a false flag a real documented military tactic? Or is it just a buzzword people use to dismiss tragedies and try to make you distrust everything you see? Well, the answer is, it's complicated. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
You know the drill. Anytime there's a major crisis, a breaking news event, you can almost set your watch by it. The claims of a false flag start popping up, saying the whole thing was staged. It's chaotic, it's confusing, and honestly, it usually just shuts down any real conversation.
And all of this has created this fog of confusion around what the term even means.
Here's the twist, and this is so important to understand. The reason this term has so much power, the reason it's so sticky, is because it's not pure fantasy. To really get a handle on the chaos of today, we have to go back and look at the hard, documented reality of the past.
So let's get grounded in some facts, because false flags have a long and, frankly, a pretty chilling history as a tool for war and political manipulation.
You know, the name itself actually comes from the old days of naval warfare. Pirates or warships would fly the flag of a friendly country to get close to an enemy's ship, and then, at the last minute, they'd hoist their true colors and attack. In today's world, it's the ultimate deception. You carry out an attack yourself and then pin the blame on your enemy to justify whatever you wanted to do next.
And look, this isn't some kind of ancient history. These are three huge examples from just one decade in the 20th century. Japan staged a railway explosion to give themselves an excuse to invade Manchuria. The Soviet Union literally shelled its own village to create a pretext to invade Finland. But probably the most infamous textbook example is the one Nazi Germany used to kick off the Second World War.
Let's just pause on this one for a second, because the level of detail is insane. This wasn't just a vague accusation. We're talking about Nazi agents dressing up in Polish uniforms, storming a radio station, and broadcasting anti-German messages in Polish. They even murdered a local farmer and left his body at the scene, dressed up to look like one of the attackers, just to sell the lie. This was a piece of theater, a performance designed for one reason: to give Hitler the justification he needed to invade Poland.
Now, before you think this is something that only happens over there, we have to talk about one of the most jaw-dropping declassified documents in American history.
And let's be clear, this wasn't some rogue memo. This was a formal proposal, written and signed by the absolute highest levels of the U.S. military during the Cold War. And the goal? To create a reason to invade Cuba.
Just listen to that language. The goal was not to respond to an attack, it was to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering one. It's right there in black and white. It was a plan to manufacture a victim story to justify a war. And the specific ideas they floated are just horrifying. We're talking about staging terror attacks in American cities, blowing up a U.S. ship, even killing Cuban refugees at sea, and pinning all of it on Castro. They even proposed staging the downing of an American plane. The plan was literally to sacrifice American and civilian lives for a pretext.
Now, and this is absolutely the most important takeaway here. The plan was never carried out. President Kennedy was presented with it, and he flatly rejected it. But the fact that it was ever seriously considered, formally written down and signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that is a stunning, unsettling historical reality.
Okay, so let's fast forward to our era, where the battlefield has gone from land and sea to the internet. The tactic of the false flag didn't go away, not at all, it just evolved.
So, think back to 2015. Fear about ISIS was at an all-time high. And then, suddenly, this hacking group emerges, calling itself the Cyber Caliphate. It seemed like everyone's worst fears were coming true, that these terrorist groups were now masters of cyber warfare. And then they pulled off this huge attack on the French TV network, TV5 Monde. Their channels went completely dark for hours. Their websites, their social media, all taken over and replaced with ISIS propaganda. It was a massive deal, a completely new kind of attack that was treated as a terrifying act of cyber terrorism.
But then, as the digital forensics experts started digging into the code, the whole story unraveled. The technical clues, little things like the code being compiled on keyboards set to Cyrillic during Moscow business hours, they didn't point to ISIS at all. They pointed directly to a very well-known Russian state-sponsored hacking group. It was a classic digital false flag. Russia was essentially wearing an ISIS mask to carry out an attack, create chaos, and hide its own involvement.
So this brings us full circle. We've seen that false flags are absolutely real.
So how does that documented historical reality end up fueling all the baseless conspiracy theories we see online every single day? This is really the key distinction we have to make. On one side, you have documented operations. You have declassified papers, you have forensic evidence, you have historical proof. On the other side, you have these awful tragedies, where claims of a false flag get thrown around constantly, but with zero credible evidence to back them up, and usually against a mountain of proof that says otherwise.
And this quote from the historian Catherine Olmsted just nails it. When the public finds out that their own government once drafted a secret plan like Operation Northwoods, it poisons the well. It shatters trust. And that creates this fertile ground where it suddenly becomes a lot easier for some people to believe that any tragedy could be a secret government plot.
And here's the thing. This confusion isn't just an accident. It's a strategic weapon. State actors who use these tactics, like we saw with the cyber caliphate, want to create a world where you don't know what to believe. The goal of this kind of information warfare is to make it so hard to tell fact from fiction that you just give up and start to distrust everything.
And that leaves us with this huge challenge, right? When we know for a fact that deception is a real tool used by governments, how do we stay skeptical without just becoming cynical about everything? How do we tell a real documented plot from a baseless, harmful theory in a world that seems designed to confuse us? Learning to spot that lie isn't just an interesting thought exercise anymore. It's a basic survival skill for navigating the world we live in. It decides who we trust, what we believe, and how we keep our own sense of reality from being weaponized against us.